I have a son from when I was in my youth. And but my husband, actually, when I became married, was unable to conceive because he struggled with infertility himself, which just kind of got the ball rolling in my mind that, how can a person help with that? I couldn't obviously help my husband because I'm not a man, but I started just kind of Googling, women and infertility, and I found that a person can become an egg donor, and I was like, ooh, that's an interesting notion. And so at that point, I decided to look up fertility clinics local to the area, and I found ARMS. And I filled out the survey, and I received a phone call from Gail, and the rest is sort of history. The staff is amazing. All of the ladies I've had the pleasure of working with, and you, Dr. Moffitt, have always been really kind, considerate of time, and especially the nurses here, they have really always been very informative about everything. So there's never been any moment where there was a question that I felt didn't get answered or I didn't get enough feedback or information. So in terms of the staff, everybody's really amazing. I have to say, a lot of the fears that I've heard about, especially from just other women in my life, are now that I've become a donor and I've done 6 cycles, are all sort of irrational fears to me. I actually had one person say, well, if you're an egg donor, you might never have children again. And that is just completely inaccurate. I think just the fact that you can be a donor 6 times by FDA approval is indicative of the fact that you can clearly conceive more children, because obviously you have more eggs and you're still fertile and you're still able. So that was one that initially I had at least one friend say, well, doesn't that mean you can't have more children? Won't you run out of eggs? and also that is also completely inaccurate. I didn't know at the time anything about how egg follicles mature into eggs and how they sort of get, you might have multiple follicles, but in a normal cycle you would only end up with 1 or maybe 2 eggs, or under certain circumstances, but that you're able to, through all of these hormones that are used, you're able to basically mature all of these follicles, or at least a large number of them. So that was really intriguing to me to learn, and something that I can share with people when they say, well, you can run out of eggs. No, you're not going to run out of eggs. And then I've had some fears from friends that are not even related to the medical aspect. Just like, what will you do, or how do you feel about having lots of little children out there that are related to you, and what if your son one day marries one of them? And I'm just, for me, that's just such a, it seems a bit silly to me, the idea that I have a son and one day he would meet a daughter and marry that daughter through my egg donation, just because the larger number of people that exist in the world, and just the fact that in numbers wise it seems just completely improbable. But the concern about how do you feel about having other children in the world, I think that's more of a moral thing. Some people might feel uncomfortable about it. So if it's something that a person feels that they wouldn't want their genetic material, a child from their genetic material out there, then that's something they would have to consider on an individual level. For me, that's not a problem, because prior to conception, a child actually growing, my own child, to me, I don't feel that same sort of maternal instinct towards my eggs or egg follicles. I feel that it is genetic material, so I'm comfortable with that. So initially we did sort of an history and physical. I got a call from Gail. I had initially filled out a form online with some basic information. Gail gave me a call, and then I spoke with her, and we sort of went through a rundown of any kind of genetic history that there might be that I'm aware of, cancer or anything that's a genetic disease that could be carried on, any history of smoking or drug abuse, any sexual history in terms of, anything high risk, which all seems reasonable to me. And then we did a sort of a psychologic evaluation, and that was interesting. I think I had 1 or 2 visits, maybe it was 1 visit, and or no, it was 2. One, I took a sort of a questionnaire, and then I think that those results came in, and then the psychiatrist went over them and sort of had a talking session with me to kind of get an idea of my stability maybe. And she didn't say I was crazy, so that's positive. That was interesting to learn or to experience. It kind of gave me a little insight into what that process is. And then there were several different types of hormone level tests and genetic tests just to see if there's any sort of maybe high risk genetic background in me that could be carried on that might need to be tested against a potential recipient, that kind of thing. And that was probably the most time consuming, the most involved period for me personally. You definitely, in the initial phase, if you have very little time to budget to things, that might be a little bit difficult. Otherwise, once you get through that initial period, everything kind of goes very smoothly. So initially, when I went through the stimulation process, I received a teaching visit. In those days it was with Gail, and she sort of went through the do's and don'ts in terms of administering medication and taking your ovulation predictors when it's time and all of that information. And I think that in terms of actually administering the medication, it's very simple, it's very straightforward. It doesn't take a lot from an individual to figure out. The timing of day sometimes is difficult, just for me personally, because I am a late night person, and so trying to consistently always take the medication maybe between 6 and 8 p.m. gets difficult when I have a girlfriend call up and say, hey, you want to go out for dinner? And then I'm like, I can't pack all my stuff and try to find a place. So that's a little bit of a commitment, but it's only about 7 to 10 days, so it's not that large of a commitment in terms of time. Most people can manage that. As far as how I felt, Gail initially told me, she said, you might feel some bloating, you might feel a little bit more emotional or something of that nature, just like anyone who would have a change in their hormones, these kinds of things. I think the only thing I ever felt significantly was towards the very, very end, a little bloating. I felt kind of like heavy, a little bit fat. And it's not particularly uncomfortable. It's just kind of like if you had to gain some water weight kind of thing. And let's see what else. And then there's the restriction from sex. So for some people that could be a very difficult thing. I was lucky enough that through 5 of my cycles I wasn't particularly sexually active because my husband lived abroad. But for some couples, especially if they have a partner that they're actively involved with, that might be something to discuss and determine if you're able to make that commitment for the 7 to 10 days. I think most people can, but everyone's different. But that's kind of how that went. A few times or at least one time, I mixed my medication incorrectly or something. So I didn't administer it. I called. There's always someone on call that, if it's yourself or one of the nurses, who can kind of walk you through and say, okay, this is okay, or it's not okay, or if you have concerns. So that support is always there and appreciated. The first time I came in, I was extremely nervous because there's something about, it doesn't matter how big a procedure or small a procedure is, there's something about coming in and putting on the gown and being in the bed and getting fluids administered. That's very, if you're not familiar, it's very intimidating. But I kind of, when I came in, I thankfully had some warm fuzzy socks. It gets a bit cold. Donned the gown, got my fluids and everything, and then you guys put me under anesthesia, and then I woke up 10 minutes later. I don't know if it's really 10 minutes, but it feels like 10 minutes later. And that was sort of that, and we were all finished. And I know that I've always been told each cycle, because you guys always reinform us, the nurses rather, that there might be some cramping, there might be some spotting of blood, these are all normal. I've luckily, through 5 of my 6 procedures, I haven't had any more pain than menstrual cramps, and usually for me it's only been on the very first day. After that, I'm usually able to be kind of up, walking around like normal, as long as, you abide by the rules of the pelvic rest. So no horseback riding or trampolines or riding crazy in a Jeep or sex again. So, that's a little bit, if you're not used to it. My first cycle, I think I didn't abide by that rule particularly well. And it was not the best experience for me, misbehaving, we'll say. But other than that, it's pretty simple to kind of keep that in mind. I didn't face any great deal of amount of time off of work, so that was nice for me because I do work. So I think the experience has been pleasant, if you can say that about a procedure. It's been pleasant. It's been fine. I feel really glad that I went out and looked for arms. I'm really glad that I had an opportunity to be a donor. I think that there is not enough discussion about infertility as a whole, maybe because of some personal feelings, emotions that are wrapped in that, maybe a little bit of social stigma. But I feel that it's a really, I don't know if I want to say a good cause, but I certainly feel very, very lucky that I was able to play a role in helping individuals who are trying to conceive. There's nothing like, I have one son, he's amazing. I couldn't imagine my life without him. So the idea that there are couples out there who maybe would like to conceive children and who might have that same sort of experience or journey with a child and who struggle with it, being able to contribute to that in any way for me is really, really heartwarming, if you will. So I'm really glad, and also I've learned so much along the way from being a donor. I've learned that there are so many people in my life, women particularly, who have struggled with infertility in one way or another that I never would have known about if it hadn't been for my experience here. So I'm really actually very glad to have had this experience. Do it and be open about it. It's anonymous donation, so you don't have to share with others. But I think when people do, at least when I did, I found that there is a greater need than people realize.